Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CoROM podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas. Welcome back to the program. This is Aebhric O'Kelly. This week, we are with Mike Morrow, who is on the BSc Remote Paramedic faculty for the college. Mike, welcome to the program.
Aebhric, good to be with you.
So, tell us a bit about yourself and what's keeping you busy.
Between remodeling a house, getting a little bit of shoulder surgery, and working with Malta and my regular job, that's more than enough. And a 10-year-old granddaughter.
So we'll start with the surgery. So what do you haven't done? Are you reconstructing a dislocation?
Oh God, I wish. No, we were doing some work in the yard, and I tripped and fell and landed on the pointy end of a brick and fully tore or partially tore 11 muscles or ligaments in my left shoulder.
Oof.
So I had that repaired about 10 days ago.
Nice.
And so far, everything seems to be doing great. It's, tincture of time and healing.
Yeah, it is a matter of time, definitely. And are you still working in an ambulance, or what is your paramedic job?
Far from your traditional paramedic job. I actually evaluate hearts and lungs for organ transplantation.
Ooh, now that's interesting. Can you do a bit of an introduction and a deep dive into that?
I currently work for the University of Minnesota, and I also have my own company that contracts to different hospitals to do this. We get a phone call from the United Network of Organ Sharing, UNOS, that tells us, hey, we got a lung or a heart for one of your recipients. And we would sign on to that and look at all the information on the donor. It's got medical history, an entire set of all kinds of labs, blood gases, x-rays, CTs, angiograms, ultrasounds, echoes, talks about the different kinds of lab values, about virologies, whether they have like Hep B, Hep C, EBV, all that. We take all that information, and after evaluating the pictures, we basically decide if this is an organ that's worthy of transplant. So we go right away. It's either absolutely not, it's crap. Yes, it's fantastic. Or the most likely is that, hey, I might be able to do something and work with that and make it better. Usually that means it's a lung, because a heart is pretty much as good or as bad as it's going to be. But I can do things like change vent settings, change positioning, order some meds, rescan, rebronch, things like that to see how different things work in lungs. And with any luck at all, the lungs will get better. And if they do get better, then we can go ahead and decide if we can transplant it into the recipient.
So this is whilst the person still has the lungs, is that right?
Yeah, the recipient still has their bad lungs and the donor still has their lungs, yeah.
And so you're chatting with the team, the organ harvest team, to see if it is harvestable, and then they harvest, or do you help harvest?
No, we'll send a team. So if I decide that these are good enough for transplant, I'll call a surgeon, and he or she and I will discuss the donor and the recipient and match them for sizing. Because obviously you can't put a 6-foot set of lungs in a 5-foot tall person. But also, like the different lung diseases, COPD makes your chest bigger, whereas like IPF or cystic fibrosis makes your chest smaller. So even though the donor is 5'6" and the recipient's 5'6", that might be too big for somebody who has IPF or cystic fibrosis. So we got to kind of match the size of the donor's lungs to the size of the recipient's chest. Or with the heart, we measure masses of the heart versus one versus the other. But again, you can't put a 6-foot tall heart in a 5-foot tall patient. So the height wise comes into it also. Once I talk to the surgeon and we agree, yeah, let's do this, then I go ahead and we book the OR, call the recipient and have them come in, book the floor, get all the orders put in, do all the fun stuff on the backside that nobody sees.
Yeah. Do you scrub in as well?
Oh no, I live in Texas and I do all of this from home.
Ah,
Now there are some ORs, donor ORs, that have webcam access, which is great because I can actually watch the surgery and see the lungs and kind of visually check for quality. I'm on in there.
I am curious, Mike. So, how did a paramedic? You just woke up one day working as a paramedic and said, "You know what? I'm going to do organ harvest." So, how did you get from a paramedic? First off, when did you go through paramedic school, and then what was your path to this very interesting job?
I'll tell you, there's no doubt that when I first started paramedic class in 1980, there's no way that I saw this as happening at all. I worked. I started out in California for 10 years. I moved from Cleveland to California because that's where basically the tip of the spear was. And I spent 10 years out there. Came back to Cleveland and got a job in East Cleveland and spent 15 years there. While I was doing that, I worked in the ER. I was one of the first paramedics in the state of Ohio to work in an ER. And after 5 years there, I became the first paramedic in Ohio to work on a helicopter and was the full-time paramedic for Rainbow Babies and Children's. So that was kind of my introduction to critical care. And it just kind of went from there. I took a job as the director of a college program, a community college that taught paramedic, EMT, intermediate. And then we also became a site for Baltimore, UMBC's critical care transport, the CCMTP program. So we not only held courses at our college, but I traveled around the United States and offered those courses. So it'd be like Friday, Saturday, Sunday for 3 weeks. So I got very much into the critical care aspect of it, not just teaching it, but living it on a helicopter. After that, I took a job with the Cleveland Clinic and developed a critical care transport, a more advanced one for nurses, paramedics, PAs, RTs, and we taught that. I traveled around the country with IA Med teaching another critical care transport program, and then ended up teaching a class in Alaska. And the director said, "Hey, you ought to consider working up here." So I called him back like 4 weeks later when the class was over, and he's like, "Yeah, that's great. We all passed, but what about the job offer?" And I'm like, "What job are we talking about here?" And he said, "Come on up and play in Alaska." So I did. I spent 10 years up in Alaska.
Wow.
When I came back, that's when a good friend of mine said, "Hey, I got your next challenge. Here's your new adventure." And we started working for the Cleveland Clinic doing lung transplants. And in our second year there, we actually set the world record for lung transplants and did 157 lung transplants in 1 year.
That's fantastic.
It's been a journey. It's been quite the adventure the whole way through, without a doubt.
So you've been academic on your paramedic training for ages. So you've worked for different university systems and college systems teaching paramedic at the academic level. How did you get roped into the college here in Malta?
During that course of time, I met our dean, John Clark, and he and I have been friends for about 25 plus years. One thing led to another. We collaborated on several projects. We were in the Flight Paramedic Association board together, and over the years, we've just collaborated on a bunch of different things. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, this is something you know about and something you've done as the program manager." And I looked into it, and absolutely, it was like A plus B plus C equals take this job.
Nice. So tell us about your job. What are you doing for the college?
I am currently the program manager for the BSc program. So when somebody emails and says, "Hey, tell me about this program," one of the first things I do is I send them the link to our website because I want to make sure that they've gone through everything there. And I ask them, "Please go through this information and then get back to me if you have questions." And at that point, there's a little bit more skin in the game, so they're more interested for the ones that are going to be interested, and they'll email me and we'll converse for a while. And when they finally say, "Yeah, this is what I want to do," because as I've learned, it's an amazing program. It really is. The teachings, the delivery of 80% online and 20% in person in the classroom in Malta and in the clinical settings in Africa is just absolutely phenomenal. And the things that the students have told me when they're in their clinicals, it's beyond anything I could think of. It very much reminds me of when I worked in Alaska. We were the only aircraft for 57 native villages, and it was critical care level. So you're talking chest tubes, art lines, lysing drugs, antibiotics, RSI, a whole nine yards. Long before the lower 48 in the United States was doing that kind of thing. So we were actually licensed in Alaska as mobile intensive care paramedics.
So, how is your experience with CoROM running paramedic programs different than other paramedic programs you've run?
Yeah, honestly, I think there's more similarities than there are differences. But what I'm finding is it's the students. They don't just want to get a job on an ambulance with a fire department or go flying. These are people that are extremely dedicated to not only the profession but to helping people in very remote and austere settings throughout the world. And talking with a lot of these guys on WhatsApp, I'm talking to people in multiple different countries. Their background is always different, and their goals are just amazing to me. I think these are like just some of the coolest people I get to talk to. It's really a pleasure to get to talk with these guys and help them to get into this program. And then also along the way, I check in with them every now and then. Some of the students are from the United States, so just making regular phone calls and talking with them, it's just really cool. And I think that's the part that just really excites me, that we get to deliver the type of education that at the critical care level that prepares them to work in, you know, Africa, Northern Africa, at the base of Mount Kilimanjaro at 8,000 feet. Resource wise, not a whole lot. But from you getting there and being the person that everybody relies on, these are the courses and things that prepare these students for that. And they're super excited about it. Um, we had a couple of students that were there just recently. They're so excited about it. And this is not the first time this has happened, I'm told. These guys helped redesign the ambulance. They redesigned the interior and redesigned the exterior of it. They did it out of their own pockets. And other examples of buying things and setting things and teaching things to the staff there that is not available. So these guys are literally all in. And it's just, it encourages me to do as much as I can for these guys, because they're turning around and passing it on and paying it forward to doing as much as they can in the clinical settings, which in turn, as I'm told, brings them back to the classroom and motivates them more to learn more and to get back out there for their next clinicals, which is really cool.
I was down there last week in Cabocho, where two of our third-year paramedic students, Lance Sharp and Simon Ruparelia, completely revamped a 4x4 and turned it into a ambulance. And because that far up, in a rainy season, you're just not getting down to KCMC easily anyway, because nothing's really paved. But so they needed the 4x4. But I don't know how they managed to nick and borrow and beg for all the kit that they had, but it is a paramedic level ambulance now that Cabocho has available to them for transport from for a critical casualty from Cabocho down to KCMC, the tertiary hospital.
Yeah, I believe that's the ones that I was told about. Yeah, The interesting part, I think, that really struck me is in that area and in most of Africa, there is no EMS. Somebody gets sick at home, they load them in a cart, a car if they have it, or they just carry them and bring them to the hospital. And all the ambulances are used for interfacility transports, which amazing.
That is correct. In Tanzania, there's no EMS system, and I've worked with Dr. Sakita, who's our faculty member running the A&E department there, to try to figure out how to do a smartphone based system for EMS for pre-hospital, and it's just hitting barriers. But we're also in Kumasi, Ghana, where Ghana does have a robust ambulance system, and it was an interesting story that many years ago, there was this massive accident on a sports stadium where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Ghana sports fans died or injured. And the president made this decree that you have two choices. You are going to create a EMS system, or I'm going to continue sacking the minister of health. So the minister of health is like, okay, and they made it, GNAS, and we've been there. I've been there twice now. The Ghana National Ambulance Service. I set them up with the ACLS Training Center, and this time we met with them as again. And what's interesting, I guess, where I'm going with this, Mike, is even with a working EMS system, standing in the entrance of the Kumasi Emergency Department, where there's 200 beds in this A&E department, that most of the people are showing up in private vehicles or bodas, the tricycle tuk-tuk types, that will you can hire and rent. So the majority of people still are showing up in private vehicles and just randomly coming up, some of them bleeding, some of them not. And it's the same in KCMC, which is a much smaller hospital. There's 24 beds instead of 200. But you're absolutely right. The ambulances in Tanzania are for critical care transport, and they're not out responding to 999 systems or 911 systems, and that needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big part of the students are so dedicated, literally dedicated to getting through the education to be able to go into places like that and be the difference maker in these systems and to try and help develop it. It's just such a fantastic attitude that they all have. And whether it's in Africa or any other place in the world, it's really inspiring, quite honestly. And and I'm hoping to get to Africa next year to our clinical sites and see what it is that everybody's so excited about. I know that John Clark was telling me some of the things about supplies and like ventilators and how that all works, which is just amazing to me.
Indeed.
I don't know what's going to change, but something's got to change.
So, Mike, you are a U.S. paramedic, but you are mentoring our paramedic program students. Can you explain the difference to the audience here that separates the U.S. paramedic from our BSc Remote Paramedic Practice graduates? What is the difference between the paramedic that you have working in your town in Texas compared to what our graduates are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. It really comes down to one thing. Um, both groups are paramedics that could very easily function in a town, in a city, in a fire department, on an EMS service. Um, what makes the big difference is when you go to work in a place that doesn't have everything readily available that you're used to in the city, and all of a sudden, um, it's a whole different world. You have to think, okay, plan A is not happening. What is my plan B? What is my plan C in case something there fails? And that's kind of a learned thing that these guys develop over time. Um, very much like in the military, the United States found themselves in Afghanistan. They would have somebody who was wounded. They would get there, and you would find out that, oh, the weather went bad, or we can't get them out. There's a lot of fighting going on. So the medic ended up staying there for 2-3 days and had to take care of this seriously injured guy. So your idea of in the EMS world, in the city or the town, you go to the scene, you treat, stabilize, transfer, get them into the hospital, and the hospital does the same thing in the ER, treat, stabilize, and transfer. They go to the OR, or they go to CAT scan, or they go home. These guys are in places where, and I say ventilators, okay, so vents on an EMS system on an ambulance are pretty normal now. Paramedics are taught some pretty strong basics about a ventilator. Problem is like in Africa at some hospitals, they may have one ventilator, but it's in the OR and it's being used on a patient that needs surgery. So somebody who comes into the ER and is not breathing or is having difficulty breathing, they'll try everything. They'll use the CPAP, they'll give all the meds and everything. But if that doesn't work, then they're going to end up being intubated and bagged until that ventilator is available. And that could be hours, number one. And number two, do they even have the circuit, a new circuit that's needed? Because supplies in Africa are very scarce for a number of reasons. So these are the things that these guys figure out at the moment, and usually at the moment, and it's only through experience, because I guarantee you there's issues along the way that it didn't go quite as planned, but the next time and the next time and the next time, it just gets better and better and better. And that was kind of what we learned in Alaska, where you get to a village and the weather suddenly flogs in on you. We were landing on a 700-foot gravel runway in a single turbine aircraft, and we get to the clinic, and the guy's way sicker than he was when they called. And then the weather goes bad, and we end up staying there for 2 or 3 days. And this little clinic, which is run by what's called community health aid practitioners, or CHAPs, they could be high school students. Most of them are just members of the village, and they're just there to help. And they've had very basic EMT training level and nurses aid training. So we go in there, and this one room now becomes an ICU for a GI bleed, for somebody who was having a heart attack, somebody who got in a snow machine accident or was shot or stabbed or anything like that. And it's very much the same thing at these hospitals. You just don't expect, after coming from the UK or Ireland or wherever, when you're so used to being in a hospital, that, oh, get me this. And the answer is okay, where you go, get me this. And they look at you and go, we don't have that. And now you're going, okay, what's my plan B? What's my plan C? And this is the things that these guys come up with. And to see the things that they've come up with, it's just absolutely amazing.
So, Mike, how did you learn to deal with that prolonged care environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The experience of it, really. We were fortunate enough in our med boxes and bags that we carried, we had the drugs and the equipment to be able to do prolonged treatment. Because, again, when you go 600 miles west of Anchorage in Bethel, that was our base, you would service these 57 villages located throughout what they call the Delta. When it snows out there, there's nothing going into the air, nothing at all. So it's a matter of, once the snow stops, then you can get to them. If we got there before the snow, that's when we ended up spending 3 and 4 days. And it's a lot of, you draw from your clinical time, like when you were in the ICUs in the hospitals as a paramedic student, and you were taking care of people who were there for extended periods of time. So you kind of started to implement that thought process of doing vitals every 2, 3, 4 hours, making sure all the meds are going, just all the things you would do in the ICU. And now it's just up to you. And hopefully you've got somebody there with you.
So you were doing PFC before PFC was invented.
Yeah, before they put a title to it, I think so.
So when you were running the paramedic program in the U.S. College, were you including any type of prolonged care in the curriculum, or were you sticking to the Department of Transportation paramedic curriculum?
No, at that time it was just to the DOT curriculum. The number one goal, obviously, as an EMT, is to get you to be state and nationally certified and into paramedic school for those that wanted to continue. And then same thing for the paramedic class, was to get them through the program, to make sure that they were able to pass the tests, and pass the national exam and actually function in a position as a paramedic. I think the one thing that I enjoyed was kind of teaching them above that level, so that they were like literally whiz kids when it came to ventilators, when it came to labs, when it came to blood gases, things like that. So that by the time they took the national test, they were walking out of there going, that was it. And I really prided myself on the fact that we spent so much time not only working with the students, but I always like to say the students working with us, because it's a two-way street no matter where you are. If they're dedicated to it, they're more than willing to put in that time and effort. And I saw it in the classes that I taught, and I'm seeing it in these classes with CoROM. And it's just fantastic to me.
What advice are you giving our BSc paramedic students when they ask you where they can get a job when they finish our program?
The biggest thing I tell them is talk to your fellow students, because they're the ones that are out there with the knowledge of where it is that needs the help. I'm sitting here in the country of Texas. I can't really tell you where the big goals are, but in talking with these students, I can say, hey, I hear Ghana is in a bad way. I hear this place or that place really needs help. Go talk to this student. That's where I got the information. And when they get together in the classroom and they finally get to meet each other and talk over dinner and lunch and everything, this is where I think is probably the most important part for their education, because it suddenly starts to guide them in the development of what they might want to be working towards if they don't already have that.
So you are seeing a lot of crosstalk within the student body?
Oh, very much so, yeah.
You've been with the college for a couple of years now. What improvement would you like to see CoROM do?
I wish we could do more clinical time, hands-on, in person, but I understand that since there's so many people from all over the world, that makes it kind of difficult. I'm really proud of the things that I've seen that these guys are doing with the clinical time that they have, both at the hospital or at our classroom and at the hospitals in their clinicals. And the differences between their first year clinicals and their second and third year clinicals. I mean, I get the first year, you're really just learning how to be a paramedic. And I don't mean just, because that's probably the most important part as far as I'm concerned. You can't go on to be beyond a paramedic until you learn how to be a paramedic. It's very much like you can't be a paramedic unless you're an EMT. And the better an EMT you are, the better a paramedic you're going to be. So it's kind of just the natural progression of things.
So you get to read all of these clinical workbooks that they fill out whilst they're on their clinical placement.
Afterwards, yeah. Once they're submitted, I can read them all, and I can kind of like follow in the journeys. And then also after they've gone to Malta and they've done the classroom time, like for the 104, or when they've gone through TTEMS or iCare, to hear their comments on it and to see what they've discussed with other students. Again, it's just broadening their horizons on so many different topics. And it's fun to see them expand their development. It's really cool to see that happen. And by the third year, anybody who's going to the third year, obviously they're all in. And now it's a mission that they're on. and you can kind of picture them, or you can realize in their readings or when in the conversation sometime when they switch over from going through the classroom and going through the tasks of learning to really being completely dedicated to what they're going to achieve. And that's a really, really fun transition to be a part of, to see when it's happening.
You get to see the progression over 3 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's fun because in the first year, the questions are abounding. I get emails all the time, which is great. What do you think about this? What can I do with this? Blah, blah, blah. But by the time it's in the third year, I don't get just the question. I get, hey, this is my situation. I'm thinking I could do this or this, one of the two. So I not only get a question, but I get one or two or three sometime options as a response. And they're just saying, what do you think? But to see the difference in the way that they're going at this situation, it's really cool.
So you suggested more clinical time. We give them 1,125 hours of hands-on clinical time. You'd want more of the time on the ground, or would you want more time in the classroom?
Probably a little bit more classroom, but more on the ground. And I think the first year, I would like to see, and some people do it. It's an option where they go to KCMC for half of the clinical time and then come back and do the other half. And it's not to say that 375 hours isn't a lot of time, but in the bigger picture, it's not a lot of time.
When I designed the BSc program, I did look at the American Paramedic, which has some have 600 hours of clinical time. So we doubled it. So are the American paramedics getting higher quality clinical time, or what's the difference between what you're going to get as a paramedic in the U.S. versus our bachelor's program?
Well, I know that in the U.S. they get a lot more ambulance time. So they function in the ambulance, not just in the ER. Our guys are going to be in the ER and in most places on the scene, not necessarily via ambulance, but just on the scene somehow. I think that we could help them a little bit more as paramedics by having them do ambulance time somewhere.
We set that up, or we made some good connections in both northern Sweden and northern Finland. So we are going to be able to do that.
Oh, that's fantastic! Yeah, and I think the more places that we can, U.S., UK, things like that, if we can get places there, just to give the students as many options as possible, so they can see the different systems, I think that would definitely be a benefit for them. So that's awesome you're doing that.
We're looking at Gunnison, Colorado as a clinical placement site as well.
Yeah, I heard that one.
So, Mike, my final question for you is this. What advice do you have for the new medic, the new nurse, the new doctor who is just starting out their career in austere medicine?
Wow. Having been able to practice paramedicine for a number of years before going to Alaska, both in the field, on the ambulance, and in the ER, as well as in the helicopter, my advice would be to get as much experience as possible so that you become a master of the craft. Starting IVs is not, oh, I hope I get this. It's, I'm just going to get it. Intubating somebody this is not an option to miss, to fail. Understanding the medications, especially in like RSI, the drugs that you're using, understanding all this stuff all the way down to the cellular level, how they're going to interact with the person's body and with the other drugs you're giving them. That's absolutely paramount. But the more experience you can get before you go into an austere setting, the better your confidence is before you get into those settings, the better you're going to be. So for our guys, it's a 3-year program that I keep telling them you have to put in 5 years in 3 years. so that you're absolutely ready by the time you get finished with the bachelor's degree.
Good advice. Mike Morrow, you are a valued member of our faculty. It is great to have you be the voice of reason for answering these questions in our bachelor's program. And I look forward to seeing you in Malta at our conference in January.
Absolutely, Aebhric. Thank you so much for having me on here. And anytime that anybody wants to email me and has questions, m.morrow@corum.edu.mt, and I'd be glad to answer whatever questions you guys have. And Aebhric, I look forward to seeing you at the conference, man. Thanks very much.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine. If you would like to earn CPD credits for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credit, free access to our virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on our college website at corum.edu.mt.